experience in life of wanting to do the good thing, but actually, in the end, not doing the good thing, but doing the very thing, the bad thing that you didn't want to do? If so, you're in very good company. St. Paul wrote about this in Romans 7. The good that I wish to do, that I do not do, and the bad that I do not wish to do, this is what I do. And this kind of spiritual struggle is featured in the Bible in different ways. Paul talks about the struggle with sin and death and the law. In John's Gospel, Jesus talks about the ruler of this world and the father of all lies who keeps us away from the light and life. Whether you talk about evil with a capital E or our own internal struggles or Satan and the demons, all different ways of framing it, it seems that for the Bible, this stage that we are on is not a garden, but actually a battlefield. And if that is the case, then we are engaged in spiritual warfare. And if so, we might ask, how can our prayer engage with this in ways which enable our flourishing and our following of our Lord Jesus? So I'd like to spend just a few moments looking at that, prayer in terms of engaging with spiritual warfare. It's not for nothing, after all, that in the Lord's Prayer we find the words, "Deliver us from evil." Deliver us from evil. And of course, if we think of prayer as conversation with God about the things we are doing together, then obviously we will want to utilize the powerhouse that is God and God's Spirit to enable us to be victorious over that which would lead us astray and darken our minds and hearts. So 3 ways perhaps in which prayer can actually enable our victory in terms of our spiritual warfare. Number 1, in our struggles with ourselves. We all have vulnerabilities and weaknesses. Sometimes in interviews I'm giving, if somebody gives me a fairly unconvincing answer to the question about weaknesses, I might probe a little deeper and ask the question, well, okay, so which of the deadly sins is deadliest for you? And for all of us, as I say, there are weaknesses we have to watch. Well, prayerfully, we need to bring these things to God and to ask God to prepare us, for instance, for the day ahead, so that we can be aware of when we will be engaged and tempted, and ask God to give us ways in which we can be bolstered against such temptation. Might be greed, and how it is that we bring to God the fact that we want to leave 2 of the 3 donuts on that plate for our friends or colleagues rather than eating them ourselves. A small thing, you may say, a donut, but not for some people. Or how it is that we will ensure that we do not put ourselves in the place of lusting after another, as we know we might be inclined to do. Or again, if we are critical of somebody who we will be coming across in the day ahead, we ask God, for instance, how it is that we can consider not the weaknesses or the problems of the person we are criticizing, but what it is in us that is pressing our buttons that we need to bring to God for healing. So prayerful preparation for temptations ahead. Secondly, a consideration of the principalities and the powers. St. Paul in Ephesians 6 talks about how our struggle is against not the enemies of the blood and the flesh, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of darkness, the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. This can be, in mundane terms, the institutions we work for or engage with. All are human institutions, after all, and inevitably have a fallen dimension to them. What are the dark things about the institutions that we are involved? Is there a culture of scapegoating, a culture of complaint, a culture of contempt? Whatever it is, we need to consider that prayerfully and ask God how it is that we can constructively disrupt that by our attitude and our not buying in to that kind of culture. Thirdly, this whole issue of spiritual warfare is not about focusing on wickedness everywhere, but actually about asking God how it is that we can see opportunities to be channels of God's grace and love, and so be victorious in the midst of this warfare. If you like, Romans 8 is to eclipse Romans 7, or as Paul puts it in 1 Thessalonians 5:15, do not repay evil for evil, but always seek to do good for one another and for all. Practically, for instance, we are cut up by somebody on the A14 who's clearly in a terrible rush. Our instinct might be to curse them, to flash our lights at them, or even to tailgate them. But is this curse on top of what is clearly a situation where this person is fretful, perhaps has high blood pressure and is in an unearthly rush? Is it really helpful to curse? Perhaps what they need is not a curse from us, but a blessing, a prayerful blessing. What does the saying say? Be kind to all, for all are facing their own battles. Prayerful preparation for this is important, and we can think about that as we get into our car to go on to the A14. So 3 ways perhaps in which prayer can help us in our spiritual warfare. 1, prayerful preparation in relation to ourselves and our vulnerabilities. Secondly, non-collusion with the darker parts of our powers and principalities. And third, grace-generating relationships and ways in which we can bless rather than curse. Much more to be said. But for now, soldiers of Christ, arise.